Okay, so again, thank you everybody for attending and joining us today for the ConnectCenter movie screening of the documentary film Going Blind, Coming Out of the Dark about vision loss, the panel discussion. And again, APH ConnectCenter is sponsoring this, and we're doing this to help raise awareness about the benefits of low vision exams, therapy, and services. We want to get information out, but we also want this to be an opportunity to learn what is still needed out there so that we can start planning how to address those needs for you. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Joe.
Thanks, Alaya.
You're welcome.
Thank you everybody for participating on the panel, and thank you for all the guests who have come. This is very exciting to see so many people. Doing this film, Going Blind, Coming Out of the Dark about vision loss, was an extraordinary opportunity for someone who's losing his vision. Because I, like most people in this country, in this world, was terrified of blindness. And of course, I still am to some degree. But I realized doing the film that our terror is really based on ignorance and myth. Because most of us, most sighted people, don't know anyone who has, as I say, successfully lost their vision, meaning that they've kept their personhood, they've kept their sense of themselves, and they've managed to stay engaged in their lives. And doing the film, I had the opportunity to meet people who had done just that, or were doing just that. And it made me realize that as I continue to lose vision, which I have, that that should a great deal of it go, or an amount that would make a huge difference in my life, that that I could handle it. And so knowing that, I've done my best to get that information out to other people, because it's been so helpful to me. And we established an outreach campaign using the film called Going Blind and Going Forward. And this has been through our 501c3 called A Closer Look and incorporated. And so what we've been doing is we've been having panels like this, and after screenings, we've had them for medical schools, we've had them for tech students, we've had them for communities, for people who are losing their vision. And it's made a huge difference, we found, in awareness of all the opportunities that are available for people who are on the spectrum of vision loss. So with that, I think we're going to hear from Emmett from the film.
Yeah.
And then we'll move on.
Yeah, before Emmett speaks, I just want to do a real quick, brief introduction. Sorry, I skipped over that with everyone. So you can see we have a nice big panel for us today, and Joel just gave his introduction and talked about these. So other people on the panel, we've got Joel Schumann, who is an ophthalmologist and glaucoma specialist with the NYU Langland's Eye Center. And then we have Deli Shirazian, who is an assistant clinical professor and low vision therapist at SUNY College of Optometry. So thank you and welcome. David Bradburn, Vice President of Global Sales for HumanWare, Inc. And Alan Lovell, APH Information and Referral Coordinator with the APH ConnectCenter. Emmett Tran, featured in Going Blind, just like Joe mentioned. And he is also with A Closer Look, Inc. And Patricia Williams, who is also featured in Going Blind. And she is a retired person from the Veterans Administration. And I think that's everybody. I thought there was more. Look at me, I just want to welcome more people to the panel who have more good information to share. So yeah, so now that Joe's done his bit, let's go over to Emmett. Emmett, go ahead.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for having me on the panel. Really excited to be here. A lot has changed since Going Blind came out in 2010, but that movie had a huge impact on my life. I've known Joe since I was really young, and I think one of the differences between him and I in terms of our vision experiences is something that he brought up actually during our dry run for this panel discussion on Tuesday, which is that I've always lived with the visual impairment that I've had. I have ocular albinism and several other visual impairments due to that. But I've had to adjust to vision loss kind of at an early age since I've always had it. So I think that's one of the differences between Joe's and my perspectives in the film. But and we'll probably get into that a little bit more down the line. But what this movie really did to me was it taught me how to advocate for myself. It taught me that this world out there is not necessarily set up for people like me in this gray area that we occupy. And building a place for yourself is incredibly important and crucial. And again, I'm sure we'll be talking more about this. But since the movie, I went to college and kind of had to learn the education system. And I'm 24 years old now. I'm living in Brooklyn and New York. And I'm now adjusting to the working world with trying to navigate, some of the challenges that I have with my vision. And so I'm really looking forward to having a chat with everyone on the panel. And I think I'll leave it there.
Well, thank you so much, Emmett. I appreciate that. And just, you're right. A lot of things have changed since then, but it's still very relevant information that comes from the movie. And so we're so happy to have you here. The next person that I'd like to let them introduce themselves a little bit would be Patricia Williams. Pat, are you on?
All right, hold on, Pat. This is Catherine. Pat is on my phone because we can't get her unmuted. And so, Pat, you should be able to speak now.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, just give me 2 seconds, Pat. I got to get the volume up.
Okay.
There you go.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patricia Williams. I was associated and I had all been in the movie. And after all the time that has gone by, it was a great experience. A lot of people have come up to me and told me that they've seen the movie and how it affected them, how they got to understand about low vision. There's so many people that don't understand about it. It's hard to get them into this world. It's a hard world to begin with. But just being a part of the movie, it did give people insight. I was very grateful to Joe for having me in it. I was very nervous about it. I know he remembers that. But now, fast forward, I still have, of course, my vision has changed. It has actually gotten a little bit lower than it was. It's not, but I can still see. I just can't see and understand a lot of things around me. But the experience of just being in the movie, trying to educate the public and trying to let people understand about it, because I'm not the only one. Emmett and I are not the only one. There's so many people with low vision, and as you get older, people start losing their vision, and people who can hear lose their hearing. So you got to understand that there's all kinds of things that's going on, and we have to understand each other. And if we can educate, people can understand and know where you're coming from and be of a little more assistance.
Great.
Great, thank you so much, Patricia, and I'm so thankful that we got a workaround. Sometimes Zoom doesn't always participate with us, but we problem solve. So thank you so much for working with us on that. I appreciate it. Okay, now let's move over to Joel.
Hi, I'm Joel Schuman. I'm a professor and vice chair for research at NYU Langone's Department of Ophthalmology. I take care of patients. I spend about half my time doing that. I spend about a third of my time doing research and about 20% running the research program here in the Department of Ophthalmology, as well as teaching residents. It's a diverse job, and I really enjoy what I do. I see a lot of people who, fortunately, we are able to treat, to care for, to help them retain their vision. And I take care of people who are losing vision. And it's a very difficult thing for both the patient and the doctor to deal with loss of vision that we don't know how to stop. And I'm sure that we'll be talking about that during this session.
Thank you so much, Joel, for that and giving us a little bit more background about you. All right, and next person, Deli, you're up.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm Deli Shirazian, and I'm an optometrist. I completed my residency in ocular disease and low vision rehabilitation at the Kansas City VA Medical Center. And since then, I've been an assistant clinical professor at SUNY College of Optometry in New York City. So like Joel, I work with students seeing patients in our primary care and our low vision rehabilitation clinics. And I also do some clinical teaching and didactic teaching. I teach the patient-doctor communication portion of our curriculum, and I hope to be able to answer questions related to low vision rehabilitation and to really make sure people are aware of the services that are out there for them. So again, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you, Deli, for being here to take questions. There's a lot of interest in this, so happy to have you. Okay, next up is David.
I'm assuming I'm the only David. Just want to make sure.
Yeah, you're the only David.
just to be on the safe side.
Yes.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Bradburn. As Alaya mentioned during the brief intro, I work with a corporation called HumanWare. HumanWare is a manufacturer of assistive technology for people who are blind or low vision. I myself met a blind person for the first time when I was 16 years old. And that, I would say, was probably the impetus that saw me choose a career in this field. I've been working with technology for people who are blind or visually impaired, believe it or not, since 1984. So I believe they invented dirt around that time, but certainly a lot has changed in the industry. But one thing has remained common, and that is that I've met lots of people who are blind or low vision, some who were born that way, or some who lost their vision later in life. And happy to report that many of the people that we come in contact with are doing just about everything and anything you can imagine. So they are doctors and psychologists and engineers and really anything. I've even met a blind person who races a motorcycle on the Bonneville Salt Flats at 100 miles an hour. I think I'd be scared to do that myself, and I can see, but anyway, happy to be part of the panel today. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, David. Yeah, I'm scared of motorcycles in general. So yes, I agree with you. I can see and I'd still be terrified. So man, kudos to your friend who does that. All right. And last but not least, Alan Lovell.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm Alan Lovell. I'm here with APH and the APH ConnectCenter. And we bring to you information and referral services on the topic. As a person who is legally blind and has worked in the field for some 25 years now, we've assembled a group of folks who are dedicated to the field and putting information out there where it's lacking. So the APH ConnectCenter, which I'll give you some information, and I'm sure that Catherine will put it up in the chat as well. You can access our services, the web-based services, at aphconnectcenter.org. But basically, the ConnectCenter consists of 3 websites that are found at that landing page I just gave you, an 800 number, basically a hotline for folks to call and find out information, any information related to blindness or visual impairment, which is 800-232-5463. And so you may not be surprised to learn that oftentimes people will get a diagnosis at perhaps a midpoint in life. But that's it. They get the diagnosis and they're sent home, and their medical professional is not always aware of services that are in place to help you. And sometimes you find yourself sort of at a middle ground between being fully sighted and technically legally blind, which is sort of a qualifying line for services. And that gray area leaves you floundering. Okay, I'm not technically legally blind, but I'm still struggling. This is as a person who would be fully sighted for the bulk of their life, having to transition to losing sight. It's traumatic, no matter how you slice it. So we're here to answer questions relating to visual impairment, relating to technology, to services, products, help you with the emotional side of things. We find ourselves in those types of situations a lot, and we get new questions that we've never gotten before. basically on a daily basis. So welcome to the ConnectCenter, and we're glad that you're in attendance.
Yes, thank you so much, Alan, for that. I'm always impressed by the information that Alan can find and provide to people who call in for help from the APH ConnectCenter. So thank you so much, Alan, for all you do on that front. So before we get started with the questions, I do want to ask the attendees to make sure that in the chat box area, that at the bottom where it says to, make sure that you have it set to all panelists and attendees, so that you can enter your questions in the chat box and we can see them as well as the other attendees, so that everybody is, we're all on the same page. So otherwise, if it's not set to all panelists or attendees, then depending on who you have it set to, it might go just to one attendee and we won't see the question, or it may go to just one panelist and they may not see the question because they're, focusing on answering questions for you. So myself and Catherine are here to kind of mediate that for attendees. So I'm going to hand this over to Catherine Botsford, who will give us the questions that we received before the session, before the panel discussion, and then we will chime in with questions that are coming to us through the chat box. Okay, so Catherine.
Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm just going to stay here in the background. I am going through the Survey Monkey, and I noticed in the chat box that Elizabeth wrote specifically saying, in the chat box, she says, I hope you can answer the question I sent in, Emmett. Since you are a student and likely use devices in school, or maybe like so many of my students didn't want to use them. Having a student perspective is so great to hear. I watched the movie several years ago, but it was great to see it again. And she's so glad that she signed up. So I found Elizabeth's question in the Survey Monkey, and I think it's a great question for a lot of you, but we're going to give it to Emma first. So Elizabeth says, much like Dory in Finding Nemo with her "just keep swimming" mantra, as a person with a visual impairment of blindness, is there a mantra that you can share to help our VI students accept and VI students' acceptance and awareness of how tools, whatever those are, magnifiers, CCTVs, computer programs, can assist with their ability to access their educational environment? It seems that after about second grade, most of my non-all VI students, I'm going to go with most of my low vision students, begin to build a wall of "I don't need that," which is really their way of saying, I don't want to look different. It sucks. What do you think, Emmett? You got a mantra?
Mantra's tough. I have a ramble which might be able to help. I wrote a little bit about this in the blog post that I did for the ConnectCenter, but I really kind of hold this near and dear in my mind. Like, you don't know what help is out there if you don't ask. I think that's a main kind of, I don't know if it's a mantra, but it's something that I've taken to heart and really kind of focused on and in navigating most aspects of my life. I think another piece of it too is, like, the reality is that, I do look different. I am different, and like I have to figure out my life and sort things out, and that's a really tough question and thing to come to terms with when at such a younger age. There's this conformity aspect that really kind of plays a part, and it really took me until high school to really get over just the that aspect of it. I think part of it for me was like fear of looking different, and part of it was laziness. I think it's a combination of the two. But yeah, like the world that we live in is unfortunately, its status quo is not set up for people like me and some of the other folks on this panel, and it's wrong that it isn't. And the way in which we have to try harder, we have to work harder, and sometimes that can be exhausting, and making sure that you're practicing self-care is super important. But like, fortunately, even, my dad has ocular albinism too, and I'm really fortunate to have had him in my life as a guide when I was younger. I mean, he grew up, he's grew up in the 60s and 70s. And so the world is vastly different than it was back then in terms of the tools and devices that are available. You know, the question, you won't ask, you know, you won't know if you don't ask, didn't necessarily apply to him because oftentimes like there just wasn't things out there, but the accommodations are available and some are not as expensive as you might think. And so I think the main thing that I took away from like growing up and trying to navigate taking those first steps is that, you know, you won't know if you don't ask. So I hope that helps.
Can I throw something in here? There's another issue and we touch on it in the film, in that when you're first losing your vision, or as you're continuing to lose your vision, you don't necessarily know what to ask. You don't necessarily know what you've lost. And this is a problem for patients. And I mean, when I first went to a low vision therapist after having been treated for 15 years by my doctor, Dr. Rich, who, you know, who did, you know, I think did a wonderful job with me. I discovered that I had this huge hole in my vision, this huge scotoma that I had never seen before, that I had never noticed, and it was shocking to me. It was devastating, and maybe Joel, you could talk about, and Deli, you could talk about, is there a way to make sure that a patient knows what he or she is losing, and so that they don't hurt themselves? I mean, I luckily scanned naturally, so I tended to fill in my visual field. But had I not been that kind of a person, I could have gotten into big trouble. And just on a professional basis, when you're dealing with patients, what do you do, and how can you help them to understand what to look for?
I guess I can start, Joel. There's a couple of different ways that we can help patients find their scotomas or areas of vision where they can no longer see. So it depends too on whether it's central or not central. So one of the central ways we can do that is by using things like an Amsler grid, or if it's more out in the periphery or not in their central vision, we can do a specific visual field test called the Goldman visual field, which is actually done by the doctor themselves in our clinic, so that we can actually manipulate the test ourselves. And that allows us to also map out where that area is. And once we figure out that area, we can either refer for certain things like orientation and mobility training, which can help patients who have had significant side vision loss. Or we can also do scanning training in office to make sure that you're aware of that area and that you're using enough eye movements to make sure that you're scanning your environment safely, so that you're navigating and not bumping into things, for example.
Yeah, so it's about knowing where their scotoma is, so
Yes.
that they can work around it. Joel, what do you think in terms of?
Yeah, so we also do formal visual field testing, and we have a setup in our clinic where we have a large monitor, and we're able to show the patient their visual fields, and also go over the measurements of the shape and thickness of the nerve tissue in the back of the eye, because that nerve tissue is what supplies the vision. If you don't have the nerve tissue working, then you can't see. And so we try to put the whole picture together for the patient. And in going over the visual field tests, there are areas that are darker and areas that are lighter, and the darker areas are where it's more difficult to see. And we try to go through that and explain to the patient, okay, well, here's where you are now. These are the areas that you have difficulty seeing in. And especially if those areas are down below, we try to explain to the patient that they have to be really careful when they're walking, going down steps, curbs, anything that might present an obstruction and a fall risk. for them. So there's a lot more to it, obviously, but we try to go through so that we're partners in the patient's care, and the patient understands what's going on in their body, and if things are changing, going over what it is that is changing.
Mhm. I know that some doctors, excuse me, I just know that some doctors are reluctant to talk about loss with their patients. And I would recommend that people listening to this get their patients to make sure that they insist that their doctors talk to them about what their visual fields are, and so that they can deal with them. Sorry.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Alan Lovell here at APH again. You know, I saw there's all these surveys that kind of go through Facebook and social media, and I saw one that kind of speaks to this topic. If you had 3 words to tell the 18-year-old version of yourself, what would they be? And by and large, when you scan through the other people's answers, it's like the 18-year-old version of myself wouldn't listen no matter what the 47-year-old version told me. And that is so true. And your original question was about the kind of the ownership of this low vision thing and doing what it takes, no matter what it looks like, to get things done. You know, APH, our company, American Printing House for the Blind, has a whole product line of books, large print and Braille books that are meant to look like the regular print version on the outside for those students. It usually takes about twice as many volumes to produce a book in that format of large print or Braille, but it's available full color, same size as the other kids, so so they can look and feel as normal as possible. When a kid finds themselves in that middle ground like they found me, you know, I had enough sight to basically pull it off and make people think that I was mostly sighted until I did something that looked really stupid. So you know, you can try on for size all the mantras you want, you know, go be the inspiration. You know, sometimes you're going to come off as being a little cheesy, but you know, the kids today, you do you, or you know, own what you got, do what it takes to get done. But these days there are devices and services that look a little less funny than they used to.
That was an excellent answer, Alan. Thank you. Hey, Pat, I've got you on the phone. Did you want to add anything to that, like from the workplace perspective?
Well, I'm not working now, but there are 2 things that happened to me in my life that's like, it shouldn't affect me, but it does. I went away with a friend, and I had my carry-on, you just pull it, she had hers. So I would walk, I said, listen, I can do better when I walk behind you, because I follow you. Everywhere you go, I go. And she was so upset with me because she said, walk next to me. I don't like when people walk behind me. Even though I must have said to her 10 times, I do better walking behind you because you're seeing everything and I'm not. I don't see stuff on the side. I have one eye. The other eye is very low and I can't look to the side or I bump into something. So I'm not seeing what's on the ground. I have to look down, look up, look down, look up. And people, I guess they just don't get it. And she knows I'm legally blind, and I said to her, you know, I follow you. If you go to the left, I'm right behind you going to the left. And I try not to step on your foot. So I'm just right behind you. And it was like, I don't know, it upset me. And I had to not let her know how upset I was. I was like, okay, but I'm better when I walk behind you. Oh, it's not good when people walk. You need to walk next to me. I can do better behind you. Look, this is a little sidewalk. I'm bumping all into the wall. You're walking straight. I need to walk behind you. But I guess people go through things like that. I'm not the only one, but that's just one of the things that I just wanted to share.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, thank you. Catherine, somebody put in the chat box, they need us to repeat the 800 number slowly because they can't see the text in the chat.
You betcha. It's 1-800.
Would you like for me to do that? Go ahead.
232 5463.
Do it one more time slow just to be on the safe side.
1-800 232 5463.
Thank you.
Awesome. Are we ready to shift to another question? That was a great discussion. In our submitted questions, there's a question here about driving, and it's a longer question, so I'm going to basically summarize it. It's got a couple of pieces. So this person was reflecting on the conversation, I believe it's Joe in the film is having with the doctor about that concern about losing the independence of driving, and kind of the advice that the doctor gave you, and the differences between like being able to drive with a completely unrestricted license versus having some kind of restricted license with, you know, a bioptic lens versus, you know, how do people make the choice, or how do you support people making the choice around deciding when it is unsafe to continue driving? Advice around that.
I can start with this one a little bit because I do a lot of evaluations for driving, but there's a lot that goes into driving, and vision is one of those things out of many. And every state has their own laws and regulations regarding who can get an unrestricted license versus restricted versus driving with a bioptic. So much of that depends on your visual acuity, or how well you see on the eye chart, as well as sometimes your visual field or your peripheral vision. So they determine that those two things will determine how safely you drive. So we can evaluate you for that and determine whether or not it's restricted or unrestricted. So unrestricted just basically means you have a license that you can drive around at night, any, you know, speed limit, it really doesn't matter. Restricted can depend on the state that you're in. So in some states, restricted means that you have a limit to daytime only, or certain speed limits or roads. Here in New York State, we can actually write in a restriction. So it really just depends on the patient and the condition that they have. And then driving with a bioptic is also another restricted license type, where you're driving with a telescopic lens. And that does require intensive training, both in office and behind the wheel, to make sure you're doing that safely. So I think these decisions and these conversations are really difficult because, you know, number one, driving isn't just driving, it is independence, like the person had mentioned when asking this question. And so I think sometimes we have to, you know, figure out if the patient also has other conditions, like that their primary care doctor needs to be managing as well, because a lot of other things do play into driving. But I think what I tell patients is I can evaluate you based on your vision, and, you know, the state is the one that's making the rules with this. And so that's kind of how I kind of go about these things.
Yeah. It's a little weird because if I walked into the DMV right now, I would pass a driving test because I have 2015 vision thanks to Joel and his crew, who now take care of me. And you know, but I don't have a great field of vision, but I can certainly pass an eye test. And but I don't drive because I think it wouldn't be responsible. I could if I had to, but I would certainly try to avoid it if I could.
Can I add something to that as well? It's always a very difficult conversation to have because of, like Deli said, it's not just driving, it's independence. And in New York State, the ophthalmologist or optometrist is not legally responsible for reporting somebody as not being capable of driving because of their vision. And whereas in some states, the physician is in charge of, is responsible, legally responsible for making that report. And so, you know, your doctor needs to have that conversation with you but it again requires that partnership where the individual who is unfortunately losing that independence takes responsibility for it and reports it to the DMV.
Excellent, thank you. That was a great answer, team. We have another question here that may actually kind of play into it a little bit, but someone asked, how do you see the future of technological advancements improving the lives of those who are at risk for vision loss?
This is Alan. There is lots of research going on. Of course, it always depends on the particular eye condition. But there are agencies, for example, the Foundation Fighting Blindness, that are in constant fundraiser mode to fund clinical trial studies for degenerative retinal eye conditions. There's the whole family of them, and very similar in the way they present, but sometimes it's gene therapy that they are finding it can restore sight in particular situations. Other times there are implants that they have been working on, a prosthesis that are restoring sight. Sometimes the prosthetic device will give a person a pixelated image. It's not a full image, but a pixelated image, but is still better than the vision that they didn't have. So I always tell people, if you have one of these eye diseases, something similar to retinitis pigmentosa or macular degeneration, anything in that family, there's just a slew of them. Go to Foundation, it's fightingblindness.org, fightingblindness.org. You can look up your eye disease and see what research is going on around the world.
David, do you, oh, sorry, Drew.
I was going to mention something and then throw it to David actually also. I was just going to talk about assistive devices, but specifically about sensory substitution. And I don't know, David, do you do anything in that area in sensory substitution?
Oh, you're mute, David.
Let me mention that first, and then I'll throw it over to you. And so what I mean by sensory substitution is there are some people for whom the types of devices that that Alan was talking about don't work because the optic nerve, the nerve that takes the information from the eye to the brain, isn't working. And so, implants won't work, and magnifiers won't work, and so there are devices. There's something called the brain port. I have no financial conflict with this, but the brain port is a device that you put on your tongue, and it actually stimulates your tongue in the pattern of what a video camera is seeing. So what you would see, and it's not vision. But it allows people to experience the visual world. So instead of using a white cane, for instance, and feeling the ground, you can experience everything in front of you, so that if a tree branch is hanging down, you would see that before walking into it. And you can see the edge of the curb on the street and be able to be independent and walking around. So there are other technologies as well that stimulate other areas of the body to give that visual information to. So it's providing visual information through non-visual pathways. And this is a very exciting and active area of research. And things like the brain port are available now, and there are more sophisticated devices that are on the way. And so I'll turn it over to you, David, to talk about other assistive technologies.
Sure. Thank you very much, Joel. And sorry, I was on mute before, and I know that Catherine was trying to tell me that. Sorry. So a couple of things to say. The first is that, when it comes to any type of assistive technology, the line of questions that I would typically start with someone is really trying to find out what they would like to achieve. And so if the goal is that someone wants to have 20/20 vision, then the conversation is going to very quickly become one where we're saying that probably isn't that realistic. assistive technology can certainly compensate in a number of areas. There are wearable devices, and perhaps some of you have seen some of these devices that use artificial intelligence to augment your surroundings. So, Joel, you were speaking about some of the solutions that can provide some form of outlining of the pavement. There are devices out there indeed that can provide outlining of just about any edge or surface. And they can be used in well-lit conditions. They don't use night vision, so they wouldn't be something people would be wearing at nighttime. There is other types of assistive technology using artificial intelligence, though, that companies like HumanWare are looking at. So we're working on a solution currently called the Automated Blind Pedestrian. We'll probably change the name when it comes out, but that's the code name anyway. And the Automated Blind Pedestrian, the idea of this product is to not only get you in front of a building, but to help you find the door and navigate your way through it. And once you, of course, get through the front door, then you start wondering about kind of, indoor navigation, which is a whole other, another concept. I think to the extent that there is optic nerve damage, then usually speech or text to speech more correctly is going to be the primary solution. And there are different solutions using that. There is also devices that use haptic feedback, which is to say they are vibrating based on potential objects in front of you. And then there are also devices, Orcam is one company that comes to mind, where they make an attachment that fits on, if you're wearing reading glasses, even if they're not prescriptive ones, it attaches to the side, and it actually has things like facial recognition, color recognition, optical character recognition to convert print into speech, and everything is being spoken to you through a tiny speaker, which is close enough to the ear that you'll hear it, but not loud enough that people who are not using it will hear. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're at right now, but I will just close with this one comment. I did many years ago, used to work with the inventor Raymond Kurzweil. Ray Kurzweil invented the very first reading machine for the blind, among other things. And he's written a number of books over the years on artificial intelligence and the age of intelligent machines. And he foresaw that by 2030, which I realize feels like a long way off, but by 2030 that we will have the technology with nanotechnology where we will begin to see these sorts of implants that most of us only dream of today to really make a difference that will be meaningful.
Cool, thanks. We have another question. Someone wants to know, for the panel, from your perspective, what do you think are the most important things for parents and teachers of children with visual impairments to discuss with those children to prepare them for adulthood with vision loss?
Would you like for me to start?
Sure, Alan.
I have some thoughts on it. These are things that I have always, bits of advice that I would impart to other parents. And that, number one, is not to over shelter. I was mainstreamed. They knew that I had a visual disability or a deficit at the age of 6 months old. They didn't really give it a diagnosis until I was 4 years old. And the answer is going to rely heavily on what you have at your disposal, where you live, if you're a rural area or if you're in a metropolitan area. But I remember the day that my parents took me to our school for the blind just to see what it was all about. And ultimately, their decision was to mainstream me in the regular public school system and integrate me with all the regular kids. But we also had adapted vision programs, which allowed me to go to regular classes, yet have my needs met with a resource room either having something magnified or put into Braille, or in the absence of that, having things read to me. I feel like the mainstreaming part of my life better prepared me sort of socially, in a way, with the realities of life. Now, that's not an answer that's going to work for everybody, but that's an answer that really worked well, I believe, for me. But basically not to over shelter. Let them have the experiences, short of letting them run off of a cliff. The experiences will build their character and their sense of adventure.
I'd like to say that I think there's a broader way of looking at this, and that is to raise your children with a sense of respect for everyone, and a sense of everyone has value and worth, and look for what different people can give. I've learned that intensely from Jessica Jones in Going Blind, the teacher, where she is what she mines children, MINES, for their value, and brings out the just their strengths and their creativity. It's quite remarkable. It takes patience, but I think to let kids know that everyone has value is really, really important. And I would also recommend to parents a fantastic book called The Planet of the Blind by Thomas Gusistu. And he's a poet who was raised, he's quite blind from birth, not totally, but tremendous vision loss. And his parents chose to ignore it. And he suffered terribly for it. And it's a fascinating, fascinating book. And I would highly, highly recommend it. It's called The Planet of the Blind. Emmett, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, both of you covered a lot of ground right there. But in particular, like Alan said, it really depends on where you're from, what your context is, what support system you have at home and at school. But I don't know. I grew up with low vision. I've always had it. And like Alan had mentioned, it took years for them to get the right prescription for my vision, just because I wasn't able to articulate it. It's a like a lifelong process. And I think growing up this way, my retina detached in 2017, and I've been kind of going through a cataract in my left eye and navigating the vision loss there over time. And so navigating that, I think growing up with vision loss prepared me to figure out what I needed to ask for and know what looks right and what doesn't look right. But having a support system is huge, and I think having someone like learn on their own their limits and their boundaries while also being there to support them when you think they need it is really important. There's never a time when I'm out with my brother these days in a restaurant and we're going to get food and he will just start reading the menu to me, like right off the bat. And it's just kind of, there's these mini support systems that are out there that really kind of fill in the blanks, and learning to articulate yourself and your own vision, I think, is hugely important as well. And yeah, also not being a helicopter parent as well, as hard as that might be. Like Alan said, like not having your kid, run off a cliff, but, have them make mistakes and learn from them. And it took me until my sophomore year of high school to really improve my grades and like figure out my limitations and how to find success in class. It's a lifelong process, and that can be really overwhelming for someone who's really young, like when I was. And something that I continue to have to work with. And so it's really kind of a lifelong negotiation and conversation. And you can't have this one phrase or one kind of fix all moment. But I think preparing them to know that this is something they're going to have to negotiate for a long time, but also that they're not alone. Like, I don't know, maybe editorializing a bit, but I think in America, we often have this bootstrap mentality that you have to go it alone and figure your life out. And I think a lot of my early adulthood has been unlearning that and pushing back against that mentality and saying that, like, no, there is help out there and it's very okay to be vulnerable and ask for help. And I think that's something that takes a while to learn how to do, just from like an egocentric perspective. But I think, like, culturally and from a societal perspective too, we have this tendency to say, figure it out on your own and do it on your own. And I think there's value and merit in that, because you start to figure out, you know, what you can do and what you can't, but there's also limitations in saying, if you push that too hard on someone, they'll never really, know how to ask or where to ask things. And so, I don't know, preparing someone that this is going to be a lifelong journey and process is overwhelming. But yeah, my parents, I was fortunate to have really loving and amazing parents who walked me through. And, my dad didn't necessarily have the same advantages that I did in terms of access to a lot of accommodations, but they kind of really drilled into me that you got to ask for it or it's not going to come.
And I think it's really important for just to put what Emmett said in a little bit of a different way, is to raise a child with enough respect for themselves and who they are, that and what they have, to respect who they are, what they have, and what they don't have, so that they can ask for help in a way that that works for them. And I mean, when my vision got to the point that it was disastrous going into a CVS, I learned to just walk in and go to the counter and say, I have terrible vision. Would you mind helping me? And the answer was always yes, of course. And I would get what I wanted. And it's an easy thing to do, but for some people, it would be a very difficult thing to do. And I think it's important that people know that that's a simple thing to do and there's nothing wrong with it.
I completely agree with that. I guess, like, me first going to college and starting to shop regularly on a regular basis, going into grocery stores was just one of the most stressful thing on the planet for me. But just because I didn't know where things were and it was tough for me to see, and everyone's moving around. And so going with a friend who understands where you're coming from and can help point things out to you, but also asking someone, like learning to ask those questions, like Joe mentioned, I think was really major for me. So yeah, totally echoing that.
Pat, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think that's excellent. I often think about when I've gone into a store, and so many times I didn't want to ask, but then when I would ask, they would point. And I had to learn to say, I really can't see, or have my cane and let them see that I can't see. And they would go to what I need. I would come out with what I need, as opposed to being in the store for so long and being so frustrated, because that's what we do sometimes. We don't want to ask. So I've learned to ask, and it really works. Don't be ashamed to ask. People are willing to help.
Excellent. Thank you.
Pat, I'll reiterate what Pat said about the cane. This is the hardest thing to adjust to if you're losing sight, where you once were able to thrive without it. Then things become kind of hairy. And then it's something that you really should use. And I talk to people all the time who are just not ready to make that leap to being a white cane carrier. But I will just tell you, you carry a cane around, even if you're still able to see well enough to get yourself around, it identifies you instantly as visually impaired and avoids potentially awkward encounters. And even if you're just having it in your hand and saying, you know what, could you help me out? And people will be impressed by you rather than put out by you. Look how you're doing. You're doing great. With your independence and things like that. That's just a simple thing to do, to identify yourself instantly to the public as visually impaired. And and at least in my experience, it's not something that people ever look down on or that anyone should ever be ashamed of.
Alan, I was told that all the time and encouraged to use a cane for years. And I didn't until I lost the vision in my left eye. And I used it for about 6 months while I got used to, having lost my three-dimensional vision. And I don't think anyone ever noticed I was using a cane on New York City streets because they were so busy looking at their telephones. And the entire time that I used the cane, which was 6 months. One person asked if they could help me, and it was shocking. And I realized that no one had ever even inquired if I needed help. And I know it's a nice thought, and I guess it's true certain places, but I'll tell you, in New York City, it's nobody notices.
Well, yeah, crowded, busy streets in New York are far different than the grocery store in Kentucky, obviously. But I always put it right out in front of me. There's no mistaking it. Of course, I have to. I'm at the point where I have to.
Yeah.
I'm not tucking it behind me or under my arm.
Right.
But it is a good, solid way to identify yourself as visually impaired without using words.
This is David. I did want to just add a comment to this topic, and that is that if you're a parent of a child who is blind and is learning Braille or capable of learning Braille, I would really encourage that, like, big time. Your child may not know what they want to do when they get older, and certainly knowing Braille isn't required for every job out there. But I will tell you that at HumanWare, we employ a number of people who are blind, and without exception, they are all excellent Braillists. If your child desires a career in anything to do with technology, especially like computer programming, software engineer, that sort of thing, knowing Braille and being able to read it is going to provide them with the accuracy they need for that job. Braille literacy is not great anywhere. Doesn't matter which country you're in. I think 10% is about as high as I've seen it from the National Federation of the Blind. But truly, if you want to have a career in the tech field, you need to know Braille.
Why is that, David?
Well, because you need accuracy. If you're listening to text-to-speech, now you may be used to your text-to-speech, and perhaps you can discern when it's saying a P versus B versus D versus Z when it's reading quickly. But if you're reading computer code and you need to make sure that it's absolutely 100% accurate, the only way to do that is with Braille. And by Braille, I mean refreshable Braille. So this is electronic Braille with these plastic pins that go up and down. And so some of these can be as wide as 80 Braille characters on a line. And so you're reading a line of text and making sure that it's accurate. That isn't to say that you couldn't achieve accuracy with speech, but you will be slower. At least in my experience with all the people that I've encountered, Braille will be better. The other reason is that don't think of Braille and then think of Braille books, which are voluminous, right? I'm really thinking people are using refreshable Braille these days. So that means that they're using a Braille display in conjunction with a Bluetooth device like an iPhone or an iPad. The other thing that Braille gives you is privacy. If you're using speech, unless you've got a Bluetooth earpiece in, people could potentially be hearing what your speech is saying. Well, if you're in an office with cubicles and most of your colleagues are sighted and not using speech, they're not going to appreciate your device speaking all the time. Now, again, you can of course use headphones, but if you're using Braille, Braille is silent. And the other thing too, and I know people who are journalists on TV. I know a former customer of mine who is a journalist for the BBC. I've seen him on TV many times. And what most people don't know, I mean, the guy is extremely articulate and very intelligent. But what they don't know is that he has a 40-cell Braille display on his knees. And out of view of the camera, he is reading whatever it is that he's reading. I mean, he can cite all manner of different things, and the Braille display is silent. So again, I don't want to come across that you won't do well if you don't know Braille. That's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that if you do want to get into a high-tech job, every blind person at HumanWare, and we have a number of them, knows Braille. It's just a necessity. I don't think we would consider someone that didn't know Braille.
I would also, I want to double that, because for different reasons, it just keeps you more literate than you might be without it. When you rely solely on speech, you don't get words on paper, so to speak. I don't have any statistics to base this on other than our experience in life, but it's very common that people who are blind can be bad spellers. They don't see words out in the environment that the sighted people do everywhere. So it's a form of literacy. So just to double up on what David said.
I have another question, kind of like jumping off to another topic. But someone actually wanted to know about the COVID-19 pandemic and how it's affected those with vision loss in terms of receiving services, training, and supports. Does anybody know anything about that?
Oh gosh, I mean, in the ConnectCenter, we are have heard about this a lot now, but luckily it's becoming less and less frequent over the course of the last year. But everyone has had to figure out how to provide services in accordance with the regulations in their state. And it's been tricky. And, you know, in each state, as numbers tend to rise or drop below or above acceptable levels, some people don't want people coming to their homes, or you can't open up a public facility. So things are being done virtually. And so it does vary from state to state, from agency to agency, and what each individual is willing to deal with throughout the pandemic. Others situations have been with receiving audiobooks. Lots of folks listen to free audiobooks through the National Library Service, and those books, the service is meant to be very versatile nowadays. Everything's digital, where you can download books, you can use your smart device, this, that, and the other to have them. But as we know, not everyone is tech savvy, especially those who maybe have just dealing with vision loss, or you know, folks who are just elderly and not into technology at all. So they relied on receiving books in the mail. And the library stopped that service completely because of the potential for transferring virus with those cartridges that are mailed back and forth throughout the postal service. So even us at the ConnectCenter, we put together a plan in situations where people were just desperate and at home alone and didn't have a support system, to where we, out of good faith, would use our own resources to send them books on a thumb drive they could use and put into their players and listen to. That was just sort of a good faith measure, because that's the pits. When if you rely on something to get you through the day is important to you as these audio books, we felt good about that, and it did help quite a bit in those situations. Luckily, they were not all that frequent,
Awesome.
but it did happen.
Thanks, Alan. Does anybody else have anything on that topic?
I'll say that just with providing services for low vision rehabilitation, it became actually extremely challenging during the height of the pandemic, at least here in New York City, where we kind of stopped doing routine care and it was only emergencies. And so low vision was not running during a certain time period. And a lot of our other vision rehabilitation, like vision therapy, was still running virtually. And so we tried to see if that would work with some of our patients, but unfortunately, a lot of them, if they're having difficulties seeing their phone or their iPad, it's kind of difficult to try to get them on a call, a telehealth call, and try to troubleshoot their issues that way. It became very challenging. So thankfully, we had a social work team that reached out to a lot of our patients to see if there were any resources in our community that we could connect them with. But it was difficult there for a while, but now that things have slowly started to open back up, it's gotten much easier.
When last summer I had a couple of eye issues. I had a cataract operation with Joel's team a year before, which changed my life tremendously. A tremendous amount of vision was restored, and I now can go to CVS on my own. I did have a couple of issues, and with dry cornea and stuff like that. And one of Joel's colleagues worked with me through FaceTime and Zoom, and sending photographs of the state of my eye and stuff like that. It worked very, very well. And I think everybody was sort of astounded at how well telehealth can work. And I think it's something that we're all moving toward as much as possible.
In the chat, we have a question. Hi, Joseph. Thank you so much for all you've done to spread awareness about visual impairment and the myriad of helpful resources that exist. I also appreciated the way you explained about eye conditions and eye anatomy. You did a great job of demystifying some complex concepts. This person is curious if you've stayed in touch with any of the others in the film. They're specifically asking about Jessica, Ray, and Peter, and they'd love to hear what they're up to 11 years later.
Yes, I have stayed in touch with everyone, some more than others. Emmett and I work together. Jessica and I see each other often on panels like this. Pat and I are in touch. And I haven't spoken to Peter or Steve or Ray for a while. It's interesting. Steve wasn't available. We left him just getting used to his own apartment. And we left him that way in the film, but he wasn't able to make the premiere of the film because he was busy climbing a mountain in Nepal or somewhere. And he now climbs mountains. I think he's climbed mountains on every continent, and he's now become an inspirational speaker. And but Emmett's working on a project with our intern about that. Do you want to talk about that, Emmett?
Yeah, absolutely. So our intern for the spring, Andrea, is actually putting together a podcast series of interviews with as many of the cast of the film as she can. Some are, they're going to be around 15 to 20 minutes each, but they're going to be released in the summer. So we're excited to have a little bit of an update on what everyone's been up to. I have been able to hear every single one of them, but I was able to listen to Steve's. And he's continuing to climb mountains. He's going back to school to become an audio engineer. There's this community across the US of blind audio engineers, which is really fascinating and really amazing story that looking forward to hearing kind of the final product of, but should be getting a couple more of those interview drafts soon. So it's been really sweet and kind of amazing to see everyone kind of coming back together in this little project. So yeah.
And Andrea, our intern, is visually impaired, and this project will give her she's learning how to do podcasts, and she'll also have a finished project to show, when she wants to get a job, after college. So we're very proud of her, and she's doing a great job.
Exciting. We have a question that goes back to what training and supports have people on the panel found most helpful in their adjustment to vision loss, or in supporting people in adjustment to vision loss?
Well, for me, it was other people, meeting people who'd lost their vision. And they were just so incredibly generous and detailed in their stories and how they did it. And as I said before, as I've continued to lose vision, or have lost maybe more vision for different reasons along the way, it's been extraordinarily helpful to me. I had an operation where I had a bleed, and I went totally blind for a little bit, like for a couple of days, and then it started to come back, and I knew it would come back. But it was I would have been a lot more terrified had I not met everybody in the film and understood that, if it didn't come back, I could handle that. I wouldn't want to, but I could. And that was a very big deal, a huge deal for me. So for most part, it was talking to people. And a bit of advice that I got from Sam Janaskowskis, who was teaching Steve at the Blind Rehab Center for the VA in Chicago, when he said to me, "You can't spend your life worrying about what's going to come and trying to prepare for what's going to come. You have to deal with what is, and you do the best you can, and then if things change, then you adapt to that. But in the meantime, live your life now." And it was a revelation to me, because every time I'd lost another little bit of vision, I would become apoplectic, basically, and worried about what's going to happen next, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this two lines of advice literally changed my life and my outlook about everything.
Nice.
Yeah, I can speak to that as well, just in terms of, I mean, some tools that have helped me in my life as a student for the most part when I was in school, and I'm actually going back this fall for a master's, and we'll be putting these to work again, are those, I mean, they're pretty cheap. There's like really easy fixes, like, yes, you can go to, you can certainly pay for more expensive equipment, but like when I was younger in elementary school and I was looking for tools, those little sheet magnifiers you could get at Staples that were like, 10, 15 bucks. Those really kind of changed the game for me when I was in school. I'd put it over, if I had a pop quiz in school and I had a 1-page quiz I had to answer, I would just put it over my quiz and answer my questions that way. Those little domes that they sell now online too that aren't terribly expensive, little dome magnifiers, I found them incredibly helpful. But again, I think it's tough to say, like, because it very much so is case by case in the context that you're in, right? Like, when I took the SATs, I had to ask to make sure I had a blown up test in extra time. These are certain things that are absolutely out there and available. And, part of it depends on the school that you go to as well, and the resources that they have, and the amount of time and energy they put toward those centers. When my retina detached when I was in college, and I was going through kind of months of recovery, there was a resource center at Wesleyan where I went for my undergrad, and they talked me through how to download books on my phone so I could have my phone read me text. I was an English major, so I had a lot of novels to get through, and so I was listening through a lot of these books and trying to make it work. And I was communicating with my professors and saying, hey, I went through this, pretty intense surgery. It's going to be a little while. And they worked with me to help me graduate on time. And not every institution is like that. And not every person is as forgiving and understanding. But, once you're at this place where you're trying to kind of navigate, if it's an educational institution or if you're at work, right? And, being communicative about what you can do and what you can't. And like, I think learning how to manage your time and set your own expectations for your own success at work and in school was really big for me, because the expectations for me to finish a test or a quiz were totally different from the kid next to me. And I think that goes beyond vision too, and that is tangential, but I mean, like, people with learning disabilities and all sorts of different backgrounds that people come from, like learning your own limitations, I think, is really important. And it's kind of trial and error, and I think a lot of the time. But simple things like little sheets that you can get at Staples really changed my life. Nothing kind of crazy or out of the ordinary. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. When I talk to folks about this, there's usually a high-tech solution and a low-tech solution, and a lot of times deploying that low-tech solution, you've given it enough thought and common sense. It's things that a lot of people have figured out on their own, like applying raised markers to buttons on your appliances that you can't see. But assuming that we are talking about folks who have lost their sight as either a young adult or an adult, what would is usually most helpful to them is getting enrolled in their state services for the blind, who provide training in just about any area of life that you can think of as it pertains to visual impairment and blindness. Second to that is support groups, talking to others who are or have dealt with the same type of thing. And then, of course, just reaching out for help. Again, we talk with folks all the time, and we're able to help provide simple solutions. The simplest example I can think of that has made the biggest impression is something like, a sweet old lady said, I have to have my husband help me put the toothpaste on my toothbrush. And that's just so, demeaning. It's taken so much away in the sense of independence. And something you could just say is, well, how about squirting the toothpaste in your mouth first? And then, most people don't think of that. What? That's just what? And that just made her day. So talking with others and support groups, and of course, rehab services.
Pat, did you have anything you wanted to add about tools or strategies to adjust to vision loss?
No, that was sweet. I love that. You just told her to put the toothpaste in her mouth. Little things like that. Sometimes you don't think of it, but those things really do help. And I think that's so sweet. But I really have nothing else to add. Everything is so wonderful.
David, I bet you could help us out with that question.
Well, I'm not visually impaired, so my perspective just comes from knowing plenty of people who are. I don't know whether this helps you to adjust or not, but I would also point people towards national organizations for the blind, like the National Federation of the Blind or the American Council of the Blind. Both of these organizations are national, as I said, and they have state affiliates in every state in the US, and I believe in US territories as well. Though there are conventions, they've all been virtual for obvious reasons in the past year, but these organizations also have spin-off groups within their organization for different groups of people. So for example, they have youth groups, and each of those state chapters will have groups of young people. So you at least get to be with your peers and learn from them, as well as just other people who are experienced living life as a blind person or a person with low vision. Going to the national convention for those organizations, it almost always takes place during the month of July. If you like July 4th, you might not like their conventions. They usually take place during that holiday. And they usually always take place somewhere dreadfully hot, because where else can you get a cheap hotel but Las Vegas in July? And so going to those annual conventions is great. These conventions also have exhibits where you'll find companies like ours in attendance. And when I say companies like ours, there's probably 50 companies in there, all with different types of technology or modifications that are worth looking at. So those are very, very good. The other area too, you don't have to travel to get some of these supports. There are a whole host of online groups, some in Facebook, some outside of Facebook, listservs, email news groups, and so on a wide range of topics. So, of course, if you are an adult who is losing their vision, you probably don't know what you don't know. And so you probably wouldn't think of any of these things and probably wouldn't know where to find them anyway. But if you're a young person, there really are plenty of opportunities to kind of get up to speed very quickly and get help from people that have taken a similar journey as you.
I'm glad you said that, David. Those are a very informative groups. I've worked them for many, many years. And even working in the field, you don't get the hands-on experience that you do unless you attend one of those. And I'm certain they'll be going back in person before too long. But
yes,
if you have the chance, it's well worth it.
And may I just add one more thing about these annual conventions? I've been I can never attend both because they always seem to compete with their dates. I've attended the National Federation of the Blind, the NFB convention, more frequently in the last 5 years. I will tell you that they do offer scholarships for students who are blind or low vision. And the scholarships are generally funded through the state chapters. So it's another reason, especially if your child is not yet in college, or perhaps not yet even in high school, if they become an affiliate with some of these organizations, you don't know where that might end. And there are opportunities to get support in terms of cash towards the cost of college, but also some of the technology that can help. Though, and Alan was mentioning about some of the state rehab agencies. As some of you may or may not know, once you're out of K-12, the Department of Voc Rehab, and the name will vary by state. They're not all called Voc Rehab. In my state, it's the Massachusetts Commission for the Blind. Nevertheless, they kind of take over in terms of being able to assess your needs and to provide you with the technology that you need. And then once you are out of college and in the workplace, your Department of Rehab is also going to help with that too. So make sure you get in with those folks early. They can be a lifeline later on.
Joel, can you talk a little bit about ophthalmologists' comfort with referring to low vision and their knowledge of it now, and how that's may have changed over the years?
Right. Yeah, I think low vision rehab is so important. Like Alan said, being trained as to how to do activities of daily living, making life easier so that you can be independent, are sometimes the most important things that the eye care provider can recommend. And I think the other thing, and I'll come back to your question, Joe, is don't let your doctor pull away from you if you're losing vision, because it's a very natural response for the doc. If they can't help you, then they feel bad, and that makes them distance themselves, and pull them back in, and they can really help. To your question, I think that there is a lot more openness to an awareness of the importance of low vision rehab and training. And so docs in general will refer more often, but still not enough. And I think that there needs to be more education on this among physicians. And when we looked at this, we found that the referral rates were much lower than they should be. And that's despite our, awareness and teaching our residents, and, emphasizing it to the faculty. And we're keeping on pushing on how important it is, but it's not the first thing that comes to mind for a lot of docs, unfortunately. And so they may need to be reminded, that there are services out there, and you need them.
And on that front, it's a good segue. Part of the mission of the ConnectCenter is to get this kind of information out there. So we actually have a Getting Started with Blindness toolkit that has been revised over the years, most recently last year, but it's large print in both English and Spanish. We have them available. Ultimately, we'd like to see them in all doctors' office waiting rooms, but they're also available to anybody who requests it. And so it provides quick tips on making your homes and kitchens accessible, finding services in your area, finding support groups and things like that. And in addition to that, we have sort of an abbreviated version of that in an audio format that you can listen to by calling the ConnectCenter phone line, which we put in the chat earlier.
Great. Well, thank you. Let me, so you're not looking at my bunny background. I'm a fan of Frida Kahlo. So it's a Frida Kahlo bunny. It has like the unibrow. So that with flowers in the hair. So that's my background. So anyway, thank you so much, Alan, for adding that last bit of information. The Getting Started guide, it's sponsored, well, we obviously put it out, but it was thanks to Reader's Digest that we were actually able to get that produced. And it is, like Alan said, it is available large print in English and Spanish and electronically as well on the VisionAware website. But you can also call in to the 1-800 number to ask for a copy. And of course, we do have the directory of services that can help you find services in your area too. And I'm sure, Alan, you probably mentioned that, so I'm sorry for repeating it. It was just like something on top of mind right now. And so as we are getting close to the end here, which is, I'm like, no, there's just so much more to talk about. It's like we could go on for a lot longer. But I'd like to ask Joe for maybe some closing thoughts or closing comments before we officially close up for today.
Well, sure. I think this is great that we're having this conversation. I'm glad so many people have attended. I just want to encourage people to go back to their communities and to other communities that they know need this kind of discussion and help, so that we can have a better idea of how each of us can help, and also what we could develop online. I think there's a lot that we could develop online to help people that that don't have easy access to services. I've seen a lot of things change in the past 11, 12 years since we first did Going Blind. And I've been very impressed with the responsiveness of the medical community to what we've had to say. And Joel and I have had a partnership trying to educate residents for years now, when he was at Pittsburgh and NYU. And he's always willing to take time out to be in panels, as has Delhi. And it's really great to have people who really care and want to share this with their staffs and to help people who need it. So I very much applaud what you do and what all the other providers are doing. And I hope that we can continue this discussion. And I know that we will continue this discussion. And but we're very interested in reaching out into the places where people have not been served. I think it's very, very, very important. And by the way, Alan, you talked about high tech, low tech. We should mention that there's the Glaucoma Foundation is sponsoring a panel in 2 weeks, I think. And
Yeah, I believe in 2 weeks.
in 2 weeks. Okay. And if you go to the website for the Glaucoma Foundation, there'll be more stuff on low tech, high tech, which should be helpful for people.
Yes, exactly. And when you mentioned, Joe, about wanting to, have this information out there in the places where it's just not getting, there was a question in the chat that I'll use to kind of close this out, so you can provide that information about ways to share the movie with individuals or groups, without the educational rights, because that's expensive. So, and I know that is something that you have done.
Yes.
Is
Yes.
do those screenings and then the discussions in those communities. So you want to touch on that real quick?
Sure. Yeah, people can go to goingblindmovie.com and they can stream the film for a couple of bucks. And if they want, and if it's an organization that wants to do it, they can have their people do that, and then we can set up a panel afterwards. We can do a Zoom panel after people have watched it. Happy to do that. But it's we're very excited about sharing information and referring people to where we can.
Yes, and if that is done in those communities where people are sharing this information, like Joe said, he's happy to put together a panel. We at APH are happy to provide information and resources in your particular area, which is Alan's area of expertise, going into the INR line and looking at our directory of services and things like that, so we can then connect you to what resources are available around you, and even resources that may not be available around you, but that you may be able to gain access, via distance means. And so we won't know that obviously until the questions come up and we research that for you. But please know that yes, like Joe said, you can absolutely screen it and then set up a panel, just kind of like what we're doing here. So the good thing is we're starting it here, but obviously it's getting out there now, which is what we wanted. Get it out there, get people interested in talking, and now they can take it to their communities and their local areas, which will help. And so anyway, so again, thank you so much. I mean, we could go on forever, I know. We're definitely planning to do another movie screening later on. And of course, just keep tabs on the APH ConnectCenter for further information about other movie screenings, about information about assistive technology. And we're thankful David is here with us to kind of talk a little bit about that, and HumanWare. And we have a partnership with HumanWare anyway, and so we're in constant communication, so we can always answer those questions as well. The closing, hold on one second. Oops. And so I can't say thank you enough to all of our panelists and to everybody who's joined us for this. This is like the first time we've ever done a movie screening for the ConnectCenter, and I think it was really helpful. And I hope that when we send out a link for feedback via a survey, you let us know how it went, and if you have any other ideas about how we can do something like this again to bring the information to you, so that you can then spread that information throughout your communities. So thank you again to Joe, to Joel, to Deli, to David, to Alan, to Emmett, and to Pat. And for taking the time and doing this. This is really exciting. I think we all learned a lot. If for questions that weren't answered, because there was a lot going on in the chat, we can send those, put them together for our panelists, and if they can put together an answer, we can then send it back to the participants. I think that would be really helpful as well. And so other than that, I thank you so much, and thanks everybody for coming. And we'll hope to see you soon at the next webinar. So
bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for your patience, Pat. Thanks for working through the tech.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye.